The Appalachian Trail is a breathtakingly beautiful place, stretching over 2,000 miles from Georgia to Maine. Thousands of hikers traverse its winding paths every year, seeking solitude, challenge, or a connection with nature. But the trail has a darker side, one not often spoken of by those who return. Among the most chilling tales is that of the Whispering Woods, a stretch of trail deep in the Smoky Mountains where hikers have vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a whisper of their presence. It was late October when Mark and Sarah decided to hike the Appalachian Trail. The couple had been planning the trip for months, eager to escape the grind of their city lives. Mark was an experienced outdoorsman, confident in his ability to navigate the wilderness, while Sarah was more hesitant but excited for the adventure. They had heard stories about the trail, of course, legends of ghostly apparitions and unexplained disappearances. But they were stories, nothing more. The couple packed their gear and set out early one crisp morning, the air heavy with the scent of damp leaves and the distant call of birds. The trail was quiet, and they reveled in the peace it offered, unaware of the sinister forces that lay ahead. As they hiked deeper into the mountains, the terrain became more challenging. The trees grew thicker, their branches intertwining above the path, blocking out the sun and casting long shadows on the ground. The air grew colder, and an uneasy feeling settled over them, though neither spoke of it. By late afternoon, they reached a remote section of the trail known as the Whispering Woods. The name intrigued them. It was marked on their map as a particularly scenic area, filled with old-growth trees and a sense of ancient history. But as they entered the woods, the atmosphere changed. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves and creating a low, whispering sound that seemed to come from all around them. It was unsettling, like the forest itself was alive and watching their every move. Mark joked about it, trying to lighten the mood, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. As night fell, they set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by towering trees. The whispering had grown louder, almost as if the wind was carrying voices through the branches. They tried to ignore it, focusing on building a fire and preparing their evening meal. But the voices persisted, rising and falling in a strange, rhythmic pattern. "What do you think it is?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark shrugged, trying to appear unconcerned. "Probably just the wind. These old forests have a way of playing tricks on your mind." But Sarah wasn't convinced. She felt eyes on them, unseen and malevolent. She kept glancing over her shoulder, expecting to see someone or something lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing, just the darkness of the forest closing in around them. They ate in silence, the crackling of the fire the only sound that cut through the constant whispering. As they settled into their tent for the night, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in her chest. She lay awake, listening to the wind and the whispers, until finally exhaustion claimed her. But sleep brought no relief. Sarah dreamed of the forest, of dark figures moving between the trees, their eyes glowing like embers in the night. They whispered to her, their voices like the rustling of leaves, calling her name, beckoning her deeper into the woods. She woke with a start, heart pounding, her body drenched in cold sweat. The fire had burned low, casting eerie shadows on the walls of the tent. And then she heard it, a faint rustling outside, just beyond the circle of light. Someone was out there. "Mark," she whispered, shaking him awake. "There's someone out there." Mark groaned and sat up, rubbing his eyes. "It's probably just an animal. Go back to sleep." But Sarah knew it wasn't an animal. She could feel the presence, the weight of its gaze on her. "Please, Mark, check." Sighing, Mark grabbed his flashlight and unzipped the tent. He stepped outside, shining the beam of light into the darkness. The whispering grew louder, as if the forest itself was alive, murmuring secrets just beyond their understanding. He scanned the trees, his breath visible in the cold night air. "There's nothing out here, Sarah," he called back. But as he turned to go back into the tent, something caught his eye. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood a figure. It was tall and thin, its body wrapped in tattered, dark clothing. Its face was hidden in shadow, but Mark could feel its eyes on him, piercing and cold. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice shaking slightly. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, watching. Mark's heart raced as he backed toward the tent. "Sarah, we need to go. Now." But before he could reach her, the figure stepped forward, into the light. Its face was a mask of pale, rotting flesh, eyes hollow and black. It opened its mouth, and a low, guttural whisper escaped, echoing through the trees. Mark froze, his body paralyzed with fear. The figure raised a skeletal hand and pointed at him, its whispering growing louder, more insistent. Mark's vision blurred, his head spinning as the whispers filled his mind, drowning out all other thoughts. Sarah screamed as she saw Mark collapse to the ground, his body convulsing as if in the grip of a seizure. She rushed to his side, but he was unresponsive, his eyes wide and unseeing, his lips moving silently as if repeating the whispers that filled the air. Desperate and terrified, Sarah grabbed Mark's arm and tried to drag him back into the tent, but he was too heavy. The figure moved closer, its whispers now a deafening roar in her ears. She could feel them crawling into her mind, wrapping around her thoughts like a cold, suffocating fog. But Sarah wasn't ready to give up. She grabbed the flashlight and shone it directly at the figure. It recoiled, its form flickering like a shadow in the light. The whispers faltered, giving Sarah the chance she needed. She pulled Mark to his feet, slapping his face to snap him out of his trance. "Mark, we have to go. Now." He blinked, his eyes slowly focusing on her. "Sarah, what happened?" "No time. We need to run." She dragged him toward the trail, away from the clearing, away from the figure that still lingered at the edge of the light. They stumbled through the forest, the whispers fading behind them but never entirely gone. The trees seemed to close in around them, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. Sarah could feel the presence still watching, still following, but she refused to look back. Finally, they broke free of the whispering woods. emerging onto a ridge where the first light of dawn was beginning to creep over the horizon. The whispers were gone, replaced by the gentle rustling of leaves in the morning breeze. They collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath, their bodies shaking with fear and exhaustion. Neither spoke for a long time, the memory of what they had seen and heard too fresh, too terrifying to put into words. Mark and Sarah never spoke of the Whispering Woods again. They completed their hike, but the joy and excitement they had once felt were gone, replaced by a lingering sense of dread. They left the Appalachian Trail as soon as they could, vowing never to return. But the experience haunted them. At night, they would sometimes wake to the sound of whispering, faint but unmistakable, as if the forest was still calling to them, still trying to draw them back. And they were not the last. Hikers who venture into the Whispering Woods speak of feeling watched, of hearing voices on the wind. Some have even claimed to see a figure in the trees, a pale face peering out from the shadows, whispering secrets that no living soul should ever hear. The Appalachian Trail remains a place of beauty, but also of mystery and fear. For those who dare to walk its paths, the Whispering Woods serve as a chilling reminder that the wilderness holds more than just the wonders of nature. It holds secrets, ancient and dark, that are better left undisturbed. It was late autumn when Sarah and Dave, two seasoned hikers, set out on their ambitious trek along the Appalachian Trail. They were eager to conquer the less traveled sections, hoping for solitude and a chance to immerse themselves in the raw beauty of nature. They'd heard whispers of Harper's Pass, a particularly remote stretch known for its rugged terrain and unpredictable weather, but they were undeterred. The idea of solitude was part of the appeal. They started their journey at the base of the pass, the landscape quickly becoming more isolated and wild. The leaves had turned brilliant shades of orange and red, carpeting the forest floor and creating a mesmerizing, almost hypnotic pattern. The first few days went smoothly, the air crisp and clear, their spirits high as they marveled at the scenic views. They set up camp by a bubbling creek, the sound of water a soothing backdrop to their nightly campfire stories. On the fourth night, a dense fog rolled in unexpectedly, enveloping the campsite in an eerie, swirling mist. The temperature plummeted, and the familiar woods took on a sinister, shadowy appearance. The couple huddled close to the fire, their laughter and conversation subdued by the oppressive silence that seemed to press in from all sides. Just as Sarah began to drift into sleep, she heard a faint, distant cry, almost like a child's sob, but distorted and unsettling. She shook Dave awake, but he dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on them. Reluctantly, Sarah tried to ignore it, but the sound persisted, growing closer and more agonizing. Unable to ignore her growing unease, Sarah ventured out of the tent to investigate. The fog was thicker now, almost impenetrable. She strained her eyes, but the darkness swallowed any discernible shapes. The sobbing sound was now a low, mournful wail. As she wandered a short distance from the camp, Sarah spotted something strange. Amidst the fog, she saw a figure, pale, almost translucent, and moving slowly through the mist. It appeared to be a woman, her form flickering in and out of view like a candle flame. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The woman's face was obscured by the fog, but her sobs were heart-wrenching, filled with an emotion that transcended words. Panicking, Sarah rushed back to the camp, her heart pounding. She woke Dave, frantically recounting what she'd seen. Skeptical but concerned, Dave agreed to keep watch. The couple huddled together, every rustle of the leaves and crackle of the fire amplifying their growing dread. The night seemed endless. The wailing continued, sometimes distant, sometimes alarmingly close. Sarah and Dave tried to sleep, but each creak of the tent and each shift in the fog kept them on edge. Just before dawn, the fog began to lift, revealing a landscape starkly different from the one they had seen before. The forest seemed altered, twisted in an unnatural way. Trees that had stood tall before now appeared bent and gnarled, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. The creek, once a clear, babbling stream, now gurgled with a dark, almost black hue. With the mist clearing, Sarah and Dave packed up their camp as quickly as they could, eager to leave the unsettling atmosphere behind. They continued their hike through Harper's Pass, but the strange occurrences didn't stop. They found eerie symbols etched into tree trunks and rocks, symbols that seemed both ancient and otherworldly. The symbols appeared to move, shifting and changing as they walked past. As the sun climbed higher, they reached the end of Harper's Pass. The trail opened up to a scenic overlook, but the view was marred by the memory of the previous night. They took a moment to catch their breath, trying to shake off the unease that clung to them like the fog. It wasn't until they returned home and recounted their experience to local hikers that they learned the full extent of the trail's dark history. Harper's Pass had a chilling reputation, known among locals for being haunted by the restless spirits of those who had disappeared or died in the area. Stories spoke of a woman who had been lost in the fog many years ago, her cries for help echoing through the woods, never to be answered. Some said her spirit remained trapped, forever wandering the fog-covered paths of Harper's Pass, seeking help that would never come. The symbols they had seen were ancient markers, warnings to those who ventured too close to the place where the boundary between the living and the dead was thin. Sarah and Dave tried to put the experience behind them, but the memory of the fog, the wailing, and the eerie symbols stayed with them. Whenever they spoke of their journey, their voices carried a hint of unease, a subtle reminder of the night when they came face to face with something far beyond their understanding. To this day, Harper's Pass remains a part of the Appalachian Trail that few dare to explore, its secrets and shadows an unspoken warning to those who seek the solitude of its mist-covered paths. The Appalachian Trail is a sanctuary of beauty and serenity, winding through ancient forests and rolling mountains. But for all its majesty, it hides shadows that few dare to explore. This is the story of Hollow Creek, a remote section of the trail with a reputation that sends shivers down the spine of even the most seasoned hikers. It was late October when Jessica and Mark set out on their long-awaited Appalachian Trail hike. They had planned this trip for months, eager to escape the relentless grind of city life and immerse themselves in the tranquility of nature. They had read about Hollow Creek, but the tales of its eerie reputation were brushed aside as mere superstition. The trail was crisp with autumn's chill, and the vibrant foliage created a picturesque backdrop. Jessica, a history teacher, and Mark, a wildlife biologist, were excited to explore the rich natural and historical aspects of the area. They were prepared for a week of adventure and self-discovery. On the third day, they arrived at the section of the trail leading to Hollow Creek. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that stretched ominously across the forest floor. They set up camp near the creek, its gurgling water a soothing lullaby against the encroaching darkness. As night fell, the forest grew eerily silent. The usual sounds of nocturnal creatures seemed to vanish, replaced by an unsettling stillness. Mark, attempting to lighten the mood, told a few ghost stories around the campfire. Jessica laughed, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Around midnight, they were jolted awake by a faint, mournful wail. The sound seemed to come from deep within the forest, a desperate cry that chilled them to the bone. Mark suggested it was an animal, but Jessica couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over her. The next morning, they set out to explore the area around Hollow Creek. They discovered an old, abandoned cabin hidden among the trees, its wooden frame rotting and weather-beaten. Curiosity piqued, they decided to investigate. The cabin was filled with remnants of a long-forgotten life. Dusty furniture, rusted pots, and faded photographs of people they would never know. In one corner of the cabin, Jessica found a tattered journal. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, but the ink was still legible. The entry spoke of a man named Elias, who had lived alone in the cabin in the early 1900s. He was a recluse, shunned by the local community due to his strange behavior and unsettling stories of the forest. The final entry, scrawled hastily, read, "They are coming for me. I hear them in the creek, their voices in the water. They are hungry." The ominous tone of the journal left Jessica and Mark unsettled, but they dismissed it as the ramblings of a troubled mind. They returned to their campsite, determined to enjoy their hike despite the unease. That night, the wailing returned, louder and more insistent. It seemed to be coming from the creek itself. Mark ventured out with a flashlight, but he found nothing unusual. The forest was as silent as ever, save for the distant cries that continued to pierce the night. As the days passed, the strange occurrences increased. Objects in their campsite would shift on their own, and they would hear whispers in the darkness. Jessica began to experience vivid nightmares of being chased through the forest by shadowy figures. Mark, usually skeptical of the supernatural, found himself growing increasingly paranoid. One evening, as they sat by the creek, Mark noticed something strange in the water. The creek, usually clear, was now clouded with a thick, murky substance that seemed to swirl with a life of its own. The surface of the water rippled unnaturally, as if something was moving beneath. The wailing grew louder that night, more frenzied. It was as if the voices were calling out to them, begging for help or revenge. Jessica and Mark huddled together in their tent, their fear palpable. They had both reached the conclusion that they needed to leave, but they were miles from the nearest trailhead, and their map had mysteriously disappeared. The following morning, they packed their things quickly, their anxiety mounting. As they began their trek back, the forest seemed to close in around them. The path they had followed so carefully now twisted and turned in unfamiliar ways. It was as if the woods themselves were conspiring to keep them there. Just as they were beginning to lose hope, they stumbled upon the abandoned cabin once more. The journal, still lying in the corner, seemed to beckon them. Desperate for any clue that could help them, they read through the pages again. This time, Jessica noticed a small, almost imperceptible drawing in the margin. A crude depiction of a face with hollow eyes and an open mouth. The realization struck them with horror. The figure in the drawing resembled the shadowy figures from Jessica's nightmares. They understood now that the forest was not just haunted by Elias' troubled spirit, but by something far more malevolent, something that fed on fear and despair. With renewed determination, they forced themselves to leave the cabin behind and follow their instincts. They navigated through the forest, guided only by their sense of direction and the fading light of day. As they finally emerged from the forest, the relief they felt was overwhelming. They were exhausted and traumatized, but they had escaped Hollow Creek. They vowed never to return, their once idyllic hiking trip forever marred by the horrors they had encountered. Years later, the legend of Hollow Creek remains a chilling reminder of the dark forces that lurk in the depths of the Appalachian woods. Jessica and Mark never spoke of their experience in detail, but the terror they felt that night is a part of them forever. The Appalachian Trail, with all its beauty and splendor, holds secrets that are best left undisturbed.